Good morning. My
Morning.
name is Maria Dalboton, and I am so excited that we get to welcome our guest, Austin Duncan, to the TBI TMI podcast. I'm a licensed mental health therapist who had a severe traumatic brain injury in 2006 from a rolling car accident. And we are just really thrilled to have Austin, who is a researcher and an educator. He has got his PhD, and I'm sure he can tell us a lot more about all of his goings on, which are really useful because he and his work support the social parts of having a brain injury. I would love to have you kind of introduce yourself, and then we can talk a little about how we met and go from there.
Sure. Okay, so I'm Dr. Austin Duncan. I am a assistant professor at the College of Health at Lehigh University. Specifically, I'm a disability anthropologist. Uh, that's kind of a young and scrappy field. Those of us who are anthropologists, which is we study social and cultural phenomena and how societies interact with individuals and really create inequities and marginalizations, especially in the field of health, which is my specialty. I'm also a very severe, that's the official diagnosis, traumatic brain injury survivor. In 2003, I was hit by a bus in the head, as in a bus ran through me, in Luxor, Egypt, spent several months in a coma, and then recovered and came back to consciousness at Synagos, which is in Tukwila, which
Wow.
was like, how to put this? Basically, it was a midway stop on the way up to Harborview, where I did all my rehab, my formal rehab. Anyways, that was 23 years ago, 2 years ago, and since I've gotten my degree, I basically do a lot of work advocating for and organizing and working with and teaching about individuals with neurological and cognitive disabilities. I got my initial start working with my own community up in my own hometown of Seattle, studying traumatic brain, and a study that I call an NSF sponsored study that I call the social life of TBI. And from there, I went on to complete a postdoc at the University of Arizona College of Medicine, working with individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities and bringing brain injury into that world. And now I've been at Lehigh University for a couple of years where I teach courses on disability health and a bunch of other courses on community health. And then I also organize in the community disability groups advocating for, I don't want to call it disability rights because that's a bit of a tired paradigm.
Mm.
Disability awareness, disability treatment, disability justice, although I do not call myself a disability justice scholar because I am white and male.
Yep, yep.
Disability justice is specifically for individuals with, or, well, it's not for, it was largely started by BIPOC women of color,
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful.
fighting for essentially disability justice. But I try and keep up that fight
Yeah,
for
thank
individuals
you.
with intellectual and cognitive disabilities. That's who I am.
Thank you so much. And I I'm even more glad than before to have you here as it is Disability Awareness Month in October. So I am curious because I know you said you advocated for traumatic brain injury to be added to your research of intellectual disabilities. Would you help me and our listeners understand where the discrepancy perhaps has been in the past or what that means?
Sure, this is a very contentious issue. I don't think it should be, but it is. Perhaps your listeners are aware of what's called the neurodiversity paradigm, which is then something that says that we all have different ways our brains function,
Yeah.
which leads to different types of cognition, different types of emotional relationships, different ways of interacting with the world, and those need to be respected. And within the neurodiversity paradigm, you have what are called neurodivergences, which is individuals who have different forms of neurological functioning. Of course, this started with the autism self-help movement, but it's since come to encapsulate all of those whose brains are, to use a phrase that is actually a bit inaccurate, wired differently. In other words, individuals with different ways of understanding and knowing the world and interacting with the world. TBI, because it is not a congenital condition that you were born with, and because it is specifically damage, has been left out of that.
And is that,
But
just to clarify, sorry to interrupt you, but
yeah,
meaning are all brain injuries acquired brain injuries?
what's that? Yeah, all brain injuries that are acquired brain injuries have been left out of this paradigm.
Got it. So that's anyone who wasn't born with this.
Yes.
So even if they had a traumatic brain injury in birth?
You know, that's a gray area.
Okay.
My case is what the argument that I make is that no, TBI is very much a neurodivergence.
Yes.
It's just not something that you're born with. But my brain most definitely does work differently from most people's.
Right. Right.
And
Agreed.
I think
I second that.
we all know that. Yeah. And I think a large part of it comes from the neurodiversity movement fights for acceptance of individuals with different ways their brains work, their neurology works,
Yeah.
as not damaged. Whereas those of us with brain injuries have damaged brains.
That's right.
That's where it comes from.
Yeah.
So I understand why there's a hesitance to embrace us, but the fact of the matter is that even though was not born with my neurodivergence, I very much have neurodivergence. You
That
can hear it in my voice, in the ways I interact, and the fact that I don't I don't really get along with people that well anymore. Not that I'm not agreeable and not people don't like. It's just that like all individuals who are autistic or who have ADHD or something like that, there's just something off about me that people usually don't gel with,
Mhm.
which leads to one of the largest problems that TBI survivors face in the years after their injury: social isolation.
Yes.
And
And
we
I want
share that with other neurodivergent.
totally. And I wanted that's a huge piece of what I'm really excited to talk to you about because you're such an expert in that area. And I have never met anyone with a brain injury who doesn't struggle with social isolation. So I'm really excited. I do just want to mention that as a mental health provider myself, I saw neurodivergence, a class or whatever, and I went to it. And it was the first time that I thought, like, this is a lot of the stuff that brain injured people have, everything that they're training us and talking about, and the symptoms and the tools. And in a way, for me, it was such a useful education where symptoms that I've experienced and known finally were kind of getting named and getting um, some of the tools that myself and other people I work with either naturally were using as coping tools were in these lists of, you know, strategies plus a bunch of other stuff. And so it's like, I feel embarrassed sometimes when I'm saying to clients and to other people with brain injuries, like, yeah, the stuff for autistic people, a lot of that stuff can be really helpful for those of us who have brain injuries. There's a lot of, sometimes it feels like more resources that have been put into that and then structured explanations of the symptom and treatments, and I guess I'm talking about more holistic, less medicine, but and medicine too. So anyway, I'm really glad you brought that up because I've always struggled to understand. And it sounds like the label of intellectual disability has left us out.
Well, so it must be said that for intellectual and developmental disabilities, which is how they're usually grouped, they're different, right? But they're usually grouped together under the acronym IDD, intellectual and developmental disabilities. Brain injuries that occur before an individual is 18, 21, or 22, depending on the paradigm, fall within this framework
Okay.
because they have developmental challenges as a result of their brain injury,
Yeah.
but they're not necessarily held to have an intellectual disability. Now, for those of us who had their injuries after they turned that out, I was actually 22 when I had my injury, so I
I was
could be considered
23.
having I, yeah.
I was
In
23,
fact,
so
I
I
had my
hear
23rd
your number.
birthday in the hospital.
Wow. Wow. Yeah.
So basically, what it comes down to is that is the way we organize our society is very much, it's not based on meanings and definitions so much as it is on the specificities of rules and regulations that are required for policies to work effectively
Mm,
and resources be distributed correctly. This IDD was a big part of Kennedy's platform, John F. Kennedy's,
yeah.
because of his, I believe his sister, I think it's his sister or cousin, something. Anyways,
Yeah, I think he was. Yeah, sister,
yeah,
I think.
yeah. And that's where this push for a lot of research on intellectual development, mental disabilities, and disabilities in general, where that really started back in the 60s. And for a long time, those of us with brain injuries were, I'm not going to say we were unknown because that is not true. People make that claim, and that's completely false. They did understand about brain injuries, but it wasn't a popularly known thing
Mm,
really until the 80s when there was a furor of activities and of activity around organizing brain injury treatment and support. Hospitals, medical professionals have been doing it for years.
okay.
There's evidence of brain injury treatment as far back as ancient Egypt. It's
Wow.
not at all an unknown thing. Don't let
Yeah.
anyone tell you that it's not. But it wasn't really popularly understood until the 80s. And really, it wasn't until the 2000s with the Iran Iraq wars and TBI being the signature wound
Mm,
that it really entered the popular lexicon. And I can't remember why I was talking about that. Sorry, that's brain injury.
that's totally brain injury, and I get it, and it's very useful because for me, as I've said, this concept is new, and I've been feeling somewhat alone in trying to figure out where to get the most backed like tools for symptoms. And so that's I think where we were going. But
I
see,
can remember my connection. So that's a way of saying that this is roughly the time when the neurodiversity paradigm was getting started.
I
So
see.
those two concepts were largely combating with each other for airwaves, basically for
Hmm.
space, and that's a large part of where this discomfort with the neurodiversity community came from, including brain injury among that, or rather the neurodivergence community, including brain injury. But it must be said, there is a ridiculous wealth of benefits that come from including TBI along with autism, ADHD, other intellectual disabilities, things that do get labeled as neurodivergence commonly, because so many of our conditions are the same as others. That memory lapse that I had, that happens to neurodivergent individuals with ADHD and autism all the time.
Hmm.
And as I presented at a conference way back in Seattle in like 2020 or 2019,
Hmm.
we brain injury survivors, because we are all so different, our sequelae, the results of our brain injuries are all different.
Hmm.
There's nothing that we all necessarily have in common with each other other than that we had this accident or this injury at some point in time. But what we do share is the experience of moving about the world with a brain injury and how that makes us all different in some way that
Yeah.
is inexplicable to most people. And that's something that we also share with the neurodiversity community.
Mm,
And there's absolutely no reason that we should not be like this,
yeah.
because the benefits that come from feeling a sense of belonging to a very large and prominent community in the US is enormous. Even if you are a brain injured individual who's completely isolated, knowing that you're not alone
Yeah.
in that, as I presented this conference, is the difference that can make a difference in your well being and life.
Totally. And even, one thing just to kind of jump in really had on my mind to talk to you about with social interactions versus isolation was dating. Because I think for so many people I work with, that's a challenge. And oftentimes I will tell people, watch Dating on the Spectrum. Because even when I watched that, and I was already married, but I went like, "Oh my gosh, I should have been dating autistic people. They would have understood me." My marriage would be so much easier if I were with someone who had these symptoms. And like with brain injury, there is less of, I mean, I know some people, mm, I just heard someone saying the other week, I was talking to Daniel and I can't remember his last, Alvarez, and he was saying some people with brain injuries feel like they're wearing a sandwich board. And I'm like, I don't know that I feel that way, but I also don't think that can pick people out of nowhere and think they have a brain. I mean, I don't know if that even matters. But my point is, Love on the Spectrum, the show, I don't know if you've seen it.
I haven't, but I've heard about it because I teach so many kids with autism.
Yeah. But it's really wonderful because it shows people that there are shifts that can happen, like having a lunch outside versus inside of a loud restaurant, like choosing your meal by looking on the menu before you go to the restaurant. All these things that I've always had to do, but they're putting it kind of into a context. So not only can other neurodivergent people see this is kind of how it would be to date someone with this specific type of, I almost said head injury, but for them it's autism, but also for neurotypical people to start to get an idea of what it would be like to have a close relationship and they normalize in a way that this is just part of our vernacular and our routines. So, but yeah, that's leading me to my question. Sorry, that was a long with. So to start from my first question is speech and movement can be impacted for people with brain injuries. And I mean, just as a side note, I know for me, when I'm interacting with another person that has a brain injury, I actually say more accurately what I mean because I don't feel so rushed to get to a word. I can like actually take the time because I know there's no judgment. And then when I'm with more neurotypical people, code switch, and I'm like, say 10 words to mean the one word I meant because I don't want the dead air. So whether it's a speech thing like that or something else that makes speech more difficult or different, I suppose, or a movement challenge that really can hold people back from what I hear my clients say, what I've experienced. What are some ways or some areas where you might suggest they start to meet other people, or even what would you encourage as far as like self-talk? If there's anything else that you have, please share. It's a very
Okay, well, so full disclosure for everybody listening, watching. So I've struggled with these issues for a long time. I definitely have a combination of motion and speech impairments. And this is very true for a lot of brain injury survivors. It doesn't ever really get talked about, at least not that I've heard. So I had a partner back in 2022. My partner died when I was in Tucson, which is largely why I came here. And dealing with
So
grief,
sorry. I did not
you're
even know that.
many people didn't. It's not something that I hide, but I also don't
Yeah. I'm
bring it
so
up a lot.
sorry, Austin. That's
But
terrible.
the one of the worst possible things as a brain injury survivor that you can do is be isolated, because so many of us, in fact, not so many of us, all of us, have a renewed need for others in our lives after our brain injuries. It doesn't really matter what it does. It depends on the individual exactly what it is, but we do have that need for somebody else in our lives to help us out with whatever it is that we need help with. Even just to reassure us. And so one of the reasons that grief is such an especially dangerous thing for individuals on the not on the spectrum, but individuals who have survived brain injuries, is that suddenly that's removed. And so I've had to do this a lot myself in the last couple of years. And I'm not successful at it. I still am, I see people all the time for work. I teach students, I teach 20-year-olds several times a week. So I see people. I'm not really isolated in that way. But I also am still working at trying to develop a social circle because, when you lose a partner, everything sort of falls apart. And so I've tried a number of different things, and I've worked with my psychologist, who I still work with, um, to develop some ways to do this. There are things like meetups, although I realize that's probably said too much, that we should rely on online stuff and meetups to meet people.
No, but I'd love to hear more like about how you would decide on a meetup if you have tried that, because I find that that is very overwhelming, but I think it's a great
Yeah,
idea.
yeah, me too. So what I do is very, very carefully pick a specific activity that I like doing, that is meaningful to me in more ways than just something that I do every once in a while. For me, that's hiking. I have not found a meetup in Pennsylvania because we don't have mountains here.
You're not in Seattle anymore.
No, or Tucson, where I was before this, where there's a giant 10,000-foot mountain, like right outside, like
Oh,
almost within city limits. We don't have that, but we do have a ridiculous amount of trees, and it's very beautiful. And there's a lot of nature walks. So I've been looking around at different ones, and I look for basically people who talk about hiking like I think about hiking.
mhm.
That it's a chance for me to get out and sort of let off steam and relax without doing anything really in particular. Right. So it's like just being outside, being in nature, and knowing that the people that I'm going to be with are also interested in it for that reason. And this is important for a lot of individuals, for me especially, when I was younger. In the US, we so often affiliate with people who are like us, with our age group, with people who are doing in the same situation of life. I think it's important for brain injured individuals, especially those who are like you and I were in the process of growing up when we had our injuries, to leave that aside and realize that we can develop bonds of friendship with people who are not at all like us,
Mhm.
and be open to that.
Yeah.
I work with a lot of disabled individuals here in my city of Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, who are disabled and who are significantly older than me.
Yeah.
And learning just through exposure by hanging out with them, because they do love to talk, how to get along with them. And mostly for me, that's just listening. Really, really helps. And I think when I was starting to work with the TBI community in Seattle, because I wasn't part of that community until I was doing my dissertation research, or actually, no, on medical leave, before I did my dissertation research, when I first met that community, realizing that I can have so much in common with them, or I can get so much out of just being with them, even if we're not the same sort of people on the surface, that getting rid of that sort of ingrained understanding that I must associate with people who are like me
Yeah.
is very helpful. Because as a brain injury survivor, even though there are millions of us,
Hmm.
there's 2+ million every single year in the US, we're still, how to put this, it sort of knocks us out of our sympathetic, or the way that we naturally associate with others.
Yeah.
You're not going to be like the people around you anymore. So just
Yeah.
be more open to different kinds of friendships and relationships than you were in the past, because we all need relationships. Brain injury survivors especially need relationships. And if there's somebody who's willing to give you a relationship, I'm not talking about romance or anything like that, just
Yeah.
associations. Even if someone's willing to give you that time, let them in.
Yeah, I love that. Let them in. And one thing, a very big thing that you brought up, and I really honor that you felt comfortable to share about the loss of your partner, and I'm so very sorry. I totally different, but my dad died about a year and a half ago, and I can very much relate to, you know, all of my symptoms of brain injury got worse for quite a bit of time, kind of sort of starting to get better about with the last month or two. And with that, trying to sort of manage my symptoms, it has felt, like I said, up until very recently, like not socializing, not being with people was the only way to kind of get by, you know? And so that's just something that I think, whether it's a huge transition or a huge loss, or that it's like, yeah, it's hard to sort of manage, how do I be social even though I'm way more depressed since I'm not doing anything and not seeing anyone.
Yeah. And that's something that I should have clarified earlier. When you need to be by yourself, and trust me, I went through a lot of that in the years after my partner died. You have to let yourself do that.
Hmm.
Being social doesn't mean always being with people. Again, we have this stereotype in the US of the social person is, the gadfly who's always with people and always hanging out and always laughing. That's not true. But having people in your life who can be there when you need them there, when you want them there,
Yeah.
who will let you be on your own when you need that, those are who are important to have.
Right.
That's really important, because when you need that and you don't have anyone, you'll be alone when you need to be alone. And then all of a sudden, when you need social support, you're still alone. And that can be very damaging to psyche, health, well being.
Yeah. 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 I appreciate the clarification there. Yeah. So it's less of a push yourself to be doing stuff when you really feel like you're unable to, and more acknowledging you need to have a social network of supporters. So when you are in need, you can get that support as a brain injury survivor, knowing that being alone in those times is really not good for you. Yeah. 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 Well, so and with loneliness and with isolation, the disability part of the brain injury, for some of us with brain injuries, can feel so overwhelming that to meet a new person is really scary and really different than, even if it were 20 years ago, what we used to be like meeting new people and feeling really accepted. And now the big fear of, if I go out and meet someone, what if they are not kind or not tolerant of my differences?
Yeah, that's always That's always a serious problem. I really think that there's something. So one of the things that I did for my dissertation research was studying support groups. And support groups are a mixed bag. They can be really good. They can be spaces of inclusion. I would recommend that everyone give them a try. But they aren't beneficial for everyone. Sometimes being around other brain injury survivors, I don't know about you, but my emotions are hard to control sometimes. If I'm
Yeah.
tired, if I'm hungry, it doesn't.
Yes.
I'm never really sure why, but they can just boom go off the handle like that.
Very much so.
You have two people in the room who have the same issue, conflicts. Now, I'm not saying they do, and I'm not saying it's not good to be with other brain injury survivors, but that's a potential.
Mm-hmm.
And so for some people, support groups can be disastrous.
Yeah.
And that has to be understood. Give yourself grace if that's what you are going through. And maybe support groups are just not the things that you should be doing. But for a lot of people, I would suggest that you at least give them a try.
Yeah.
I know I have I don't know how to talk about this really, but I'm, I hate this term. So high functioning for a brain
Mm-hmm.
injury survivor that I don't always fit in with support groups where
Yeah.
there are individuals who are dealing with much greater challenges than I deal with.
Right.
And so at first, I felt very weird being in that situation until I realized that no, actually, even though they're dealing with much greater sorts of barriers to participation in life, the fundamental act of having a brain that is different than it was and learning how to re-maneuver through the world and having other people cause problems for you when you are already trying to get by with your brains, and then somebody else comes along and throws a chink in the, not bad analogy, throws a rock in the road,
Yeah.
that everyone who has a brain injury can understand that.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's
so
right.
it doesn't matter how high functioning I am. High functioning, that's such a bad term, but it doesn't matter what I'm doing now. I still understand that. And I can still get something out of spending time with people who are in that situation.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I
Yeah.
completely agree.
Yeah.
Completely agree.
So I would suggest trying out support groups, even though they're not 100% cure for social ills.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that. I think that's a good, really good reminder. And I know, especially here in Seattle, we have things like the yoga for brain injury, and that's in person. So there's different things if you can get some help with transportation or if you do drive. And so those are really good reminders that there's this common, I was going to say common enemy, which is the brain injury, but I mean like a common understanding, or this that's so powerful to feel like people get you, because I think it's so easy to feel misunderstood. So, yes. Well, I just want to kind of go back to the beginning where, you're describing being a disability anthropologist, which is very, very cool. And just find out kind of what you're doing right now. I know when we last talked, you were, I think, in the process of doing your research for the social interactions of folks with brain injury. But yeah, just anything about kind of if you're doing current research or where people can find you, just kind of.
Yeah, well, so I am doing current research. I mean, I'm an academic, so I'm always doing research. But the main project that I have several different projects. This one is the one that I'm the most excited about. I'm working with an architect and a psychologist, a social psychologist, to understand how disability, not just brain injury. We are working with at least two survivors in our pilot project, but how the built environment can impede or promote sociality. That's the social interactions and social life of disabled individuals. And how places like Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, where I live now, which is part of it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it's been around here since the 1600s, and
Wow.
lots of accessibility issues, lots of accessibility issues, and trying to understand how those, yeah, they're barriers to movement, but they're not just barriers to move, they're barriers to enjoyment and social interaction,
Yeah.
meaningful social interaction for individuals with disabilities who we know,
Yeah.
and I know from my research, have such an important need for the right kinds of social interactions. And what we're finding is in this city of Bethlehem, trying, but they're not actually doing anything
Yeah.
because everyone wants to keep the historic nature of this town. And unfortunately, that means the way people are thinking about it. I'm not saying this is what it means, but this is the way
Mhm.
people are thinking about it. That means making sure, or that means not making sure that sidewalks are actually easily accessible for individuals who have mobility impairments, making sure that crosswalks are not prepped for the visually impaired.
Mhm.
It means not making sure that I'll tell you about for my own problem. The roads are not confusing because here in this pre-car city of Bethlehem, the roads go every which way, and there's like right in front of my street. There's a two-way road, and then it turns into one lane, and then it turns back into two lanes, and then it turns into a highway. It's just like it makes no sense.
Yeah.
And for me with a brain injury, I get confused when when I've not slept or not ate or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's very inaccessible to me. And so this research looking at what are the physical improvements that we can make that can actually affect these social, what am I thinking of? Like the social well-being of
Yeah, or
individuals.
yeah, again, the well-being. And it's such an interesting thing to consider, even just hearing you say about the sidewalks that maybe are like not well maintained, that for many of the listeners and myself with a brain injury, my biggest fear is to fall. Because if I hit my head again, and that could be so horrible. I've been told like you probably wouldn't be able to speak at all, things like that, which who knows where they're getting those pieces of information. But knowing that there's a rocky road in front of my house or by the clubhouse that I'm supposed to go to, it might, like you said, deter me from even attempting to go to that meeting. Now we're not only having isolation, but sort of reduced activity. And yeah, that's very powerful stuff.
Yeah. So and then what my research always does is it always has a practical result. I'm not just looking at what are infrastructural changes that will help disabled people. I'm looking at what can we do in this place in this time right now. And so
Nice.
we're giving recommendations to the city of Bethlehem to try and actually make some improvements. Municipalities do not necessarily like doing these changes, especially for disabled people, because they don't think that we're as big a part of the population as we are. But always with my research, I am trying to actively make changes that will benefit real people. Um,
Amazing.
and so one of the things I did with my research in Seattle back in 2018 is I gave recommendations to the Brain Injury Alliance of Washington and the TBI Council of Washington. I don't know to what extent they did this. And then I also worked with several survivors to change some of the, not change, but to modify some of the programs they were doing with survivors to be more inclusive.
Mhm.
and was to always make sure that survivors had somebody with them, that even if they weren't living with them, that they at least had contact with,
Yeah.
semi-regular contact.
Yeah.
Again, isolation is such an incredibly dangerous thing for survivors. Doesn't mean aloneness. Being alone sometimes is good and it's necessary.
Yeah.
But isolation is when you don't want to be alone and you are alone.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, totally lost my train of thought there.
Well, I appreciate that. I think you were mentioning about the recommendations that you've given. And yeah, well, this has been such a dream to have you on here. Don't know if there's any place that people can find you or your things on. Mm.
I would love to actually get a website started. I just don't have the capacity.
Yeah, yeah,
But they I do have my official website with the Lehigh University, Lehigh lehigh.edu. I'm just not sure how much it's really going to be there. A lot of my publications, there's some online stuff, some blogs and things like that that I participate in that you can find online.
yeah. I will have you send those to me and I'll link them in the description below. So if any of our listeners.
Nothing that I've done recently, though, unfortunately.
But I think it's wonderful if we can get people the resources of some of the stuff you've been sharing about. That's fantastic.
And of course, individuals can always reach out to me at awd324 at lehigh.edu to
Okay.
ask any
Fantastic.
questions they have.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I will put that in the description below.
Okay.
Dr. Austin Duncan, thank you so much for being here. And this has been, I have learned so much, and I'm sure our listeners have done the same. And so I really appreciate your time and all the great work you're doing for the brain injury community, the TBI community.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I did Peace Corps service in Cameroon, East Central, West Central Africa in 2008 to 10. I was already brain injured when I did that. And one of the things that I learned was the power of community, which should not be overstated. It's not a universal for fixing things that are wrong in people's lives,
Hmm.
but it should also not be underestimated. Whenever Cameroonians leave each other, the thing that they say is in French is "on est ensemble," which means we are together.
Mm,
That's the way they say goodbye to each other. And so that's what I would say to everyone out there watching this. Ensemble, we are together. And please don't ever think that just because you had a brain injury means you are alone. You are not alone. There are millions of us in this country. Even if it's not always hard to find each other, you're not, again, you're not alone. On ensemble, we are all together in that.
you're all together. I love that. Well, thank you, and Onea Saba.
On a ensemble. It's it actually it's ONESTENSEMBLE. So it's like same like our word for ensemble.
I see. Okay. Okay. I can't say it again because I'll butcher it. I just know myself. That's not a area I'm strong in. Okay, thank you so
Well,
much.
thank you for having me on, Maria. I
It was
appreciate it.
it was fantastic. All right.